Welcome to This Explainer. Look, today we're tearing down the myth of startup luck. We're diving deep into Eric Ries's groundbreaking methodology that takes that glossy, visionary genius narrative and replaces it with a repeatable, cold, hard scientific process. So if you've ever wanted to build something new, whether that's in your cramped garage or inside some massive, sprawling corporation, you are in exactly the right place.
Okay, let's jump right in by asking a really painful question. Why do so many seemingly perfect new ventures just crash and burn? The author Eric Ries actually remembers standing in the pouring rain, intensely arguing with his co-founder after their dot-com startup completely collapsed. The crazy thing? They had done everything right. Brilliant team, killer technology, flawless execution. Yet they still failed because they built a product nobody actually wanted. It's that gut-wrenching feeling of the world just falling out from under you. So why on earth does this keep happening? Well, that exact, agonizing pain of wasted effort is exactly what drives our core source material, the lean startup. This framework is here to stop the colossal waste of time, passion, and skill caused by traditional business thinking. It gives us a rigorous, actionable framework. That way, when we pour our hearts, our sweat, and our late nights into a new project, we're absolutely sure we're building something people actually want to use. You see, we've been sold a completely false narrative. There's this myth of the inevitable visionary genius, right? We see it in movies, on magazine covers, this romantic idea that if you just have sheer determination, brilliance, and a great product, fame and fortune will naturally follow. But as Ries points out, that's a myth born of selection bias. We only ever hear about the winners. The grim reality is that most startups fail. Success isn't about good genes or just being in the right place at the right time. It can actually be engineered if you follow the right process.
Think about it like this. Traditional business plans treat a startup like launching a rocket ship. You calculate every variable, you prescribe every step, and you forecast millions in revenue in agonizing detail before you even leave the launch pad. But here's the problem. The slightest gust of wind, just a tiny error in your initial assumptions, leads to catastrophic failure. You can't just pause a rocket in midair. Instead, a startup needs to be driven like a car. You need a steering wheel. You need immediate, automatic feedback and constant course correction based on what's actually happening out there on the road. Which brings us to Section 1, a new definition. To safely grab that steering wheel, we first need to completely redefine what a startup actually is. The absolutely crucial point here is that a startup is defined by extreme uncertainty. It really has nothing to do with company size or industry or what sector you're in. If you're trying to uncover a new source of value for customers where the outcome is entirely unknown, congratulations, you're an entrepreneur and you are running a startup. Just think about how wild this is for a massive, established corporation like Intuit. This brings us to the fascinating story of SnapTax. It proves that corporate entrepreneurs at a giant financial beast are successfully running startups too. A small rebel team inside Intuit recognized a huge unknown. Could people file their taxes entirely on their cell phones? Back then, mobile filing was totally unheard of. It was a massive leap of faith. But rather than spending years building a nationwide rollout to compete with their own flagship products, they started incredibly small. They tested a highly limited version just for customers with simple returns and only in California. The result? Customers absolutely loved the magical experience of just snapping a photo of their W-2. It surprised everyone, racking up over 350,000 downloads in 3 weeks upon its national launch. Now that is entrepreneurial management in action. Okay, moving on to Section 2, the build, measure, learn loop. So how do we actually steer this vehicle? Well, this 3-step feedback loop is the absolute heartbeat of the lean startup methodology. First, you build. You turn your raw ideas into products. Second, you measure. You see how customers actually respond to those products in the real world, not just what they say they'll do in some focus group. And third, you learn. You use that hard data to decide whether to pivot or persevere. The ultimate goal of literally any startup is to minimize the total time it takes to get through this exact loop. Because here's the thing, we aren't just making stuff to stay busy. In traditional management, if you deliver a project on time and on budget, you're successful. But in a startup, if you deliver a product on time and on budget that nobody actually wants, you've completely failed. Validated learning, backed by empirical customer data, is literally the only metric of progress that actually matters. Eric Ries learned this the hard way at his early company IMVU. His engineering team spent 6 grueling months painstakingly building a feature to let 3D avatars walk around and interact. But when they finally launched it, absolutely 0 people used it. Zip. Customers didn't want to walk, they just wanted to teleport and chat. All that brilliant coding was total waste. True progress isn't lines of code, it's validated learning. Let's look at Section 3, Minimum Viable Products. To get through that learning loop as fast as humanly possible, we have to start small. Consider the amazing story of Dropbox. Founder Drew Houston was pitching to investors who didn't even believe seamless syncing across different operating systems was possible, and the engineering required to build it, monumental. So instead of hiding in a cave for years writing code for a product people might just ignore, Drew executed a genius hack. He made a simple 3-minute video demonstrating how the software would sync files. He shared it with early adopters, and his waiting list jumped from 5,000 to 75,000 people overnight. The video itself was the minimum viable product. It validated his leap of faith assumption perfectly without reading a single line of the actual software. Similarly, a startup called Food on the Table used a highly unscalable concierge MVP to learn what was actually valuable. Before writing massive amounts of software to match meal plans with grocery store sales, the CEO of this tech startup literally wandered grocery store aisles with one single mom, taking notes on a clipboard. He manually created her lists, met her at the store, and humbly observed her shopping habits. It was incredibly tedious, completely unscalable, and utterly brilliant. The validated learning they gained was worth its weight in gold, proving that an MVP doesn't even need to be software. Both of these stories beautifully anchor a really hard truth. Anything built beyond what's needed to learn is pure waste. As engineers, creatives, or designers, we naturally want to polish our work, right? We want to add features. We want it to be perfect. But if you don't even know who your customer is yet, taking the time to polish a feature they might not even use is literally throwing your time and money in the garbage. Which brings us to Section 4, Pivot or Persevere. So what happens when our learning reveals that our original brilliant idea isn't actually working? What happens when we face the harsh reality that our numbers are just flat? Well, we don't just give up. We execute a pivot. We keep one foot firmly anchored in what we've learned while changing our direction. A pivot is not a failure. It's not waving a white flag. It's a necessary scientific recalibration. It's taking that validated learning you fought so hard to gather and applying it to a new hypothesis. Let's look at the dramatic before and after metrics of a company called Wealthfront. This undeniably proves how a pivot can transform a dying business. They realized their initial strategy was hitting diminishing returns. They just weren't growing fast enough. So they made a major pivot. Look at the data here. Their registration rate jumped from 17% to 42%. Their retention skyrocketed from 8% to 21%, and their referral rate absolutely exploded from 6% to 54%. The numbers simply do not lie. They stopped looking at vanity metrics, executed a pivot, and drastically changed the trajectory of their entire company. So the crucial takeaway, and honestly, this is a huge paradigm shift, is that your survival isn't just about how much cash you have in the bank. It's about how many of these pivots you have time to execute. Most people look at their bank account, divided by their monthly burn rate, and figure out their runway. But in the lean startup method, your runway is measured by how fast you can get through that build, measure, learn loop. If you can test your assumptions and pivot faster, you effectively extend your runway without raising another dime. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought about your own projects as we wrap up this explainer. Look at the hard work you're doing right this very minute. Are you building a rigid rocket ship, meticulously planning a future that might not even exist? Or are you safely behind the steering wheel, running small, rapid experiments to validate your assumptions with real customers? What are you currently building that you should be testing instead? Stop wasting time building things nobody wants and start learning. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this completely changes how you approach